Hi, and welcome back to the Place as Medicine podcast. After a brief summer hiatus, we left off with Dr. Rachel Keith, who spoke about nature and how we're just starting to understand the benefits of it from a scientific perspective, though it's something we've known for a long time. And today I'm really excited to have my good friend Kate Hayes on the podcast. She's a landscape architect. She took a red eye in from San Francisco yesterday, so God bless.
True.
And really excited to dig in, pun intended, with her on all things pertaining to getting nature into your life, soil, pesticides, herbicides, biodiversity, why we should care about it, all these really great and exciting topics. And it's going to be both very informative, but also very practical and hands-on, hopefully. But before we jump in, exciting news. I have a sponsor for the podcast, which is wonderful. PK's Herbs, founded by someone who I've known for a very long time named Paul Kempisti. They are thoughtfully crafted herbal formulas, so on the topic of nature, designed to restore balance and health in our bodies naturally. So there are these wonderful tinctures you can take. I swear by one of them called On the Edge. I take it when I'm about to get sick, and it does pull you back and make you feel a lot better. So, the power of nature and making us feel better and heal us. Thank you to PK's Herbs for sponsoring this, and I will have the link on the website. So very excited about that. The podcast is growing up. But now let's get into it and dive into all things, landscape architecture and everything there. So Kate, if you could just tell a little bit about yourself and also what is a landscape architect? What do you do every day?
Sure. So I am a senior associate at SCAPE Landscape Architecture. We are New York headquartered landscape architecture firm, but we also have offices in New Orleans and in San Francisco, where I'm helping to lead that office. Our firm does a lot of work. We work with developers, we work with cities, we work with nonprofits. We are known a lot for our sort of resilient waterfront work and our large park work. And our community engagement work. But what are landscape architects, to back up for a bit?
Yeah.
It's something I did not know what landscape architects were, or I actually thought they were kind of just designing trophy wives' backyards in suburban Washington, D.C., where I grew up. But in fact, landscape architecture is, I always describe it as all the space between the buildings. And a famous Danish urban designer Jan Gehl describes it as the life between the buildings, which I think is one step further in that definition. But it is streetscapes, it's parks, it's plazas, it's courtyards, it's your yard, of course, it's roofed gardens, rain gardens, and it's multiple scales. It's from the neighborhood scale down to, like I said, that small courtyard. So
I can be, if I'm tending a flower bed in my home, I can call myself a landscape architect.
Well, you call yourself a landscape designer.
You
need a professional license and a bunch of exams to become a landscape architect. But yes, you can be a landscaper.
Okay.
Yes.
Good to know. So you've spent your career, in this space, and can you talk a little bit about the relationship between, just to tee it off, because this is a Place as Medicine, so we're talking about health, but can you talk a little bit about the relationship between these spaces, between the buildings, the parks, the plazas, the waterfronts, and our sense of well-being and, health, one can say?
Yeah. Well, when we're not inside, we're outside, and we are immersed in our landscapes and very much affected by the places around us. Or, our skin literally absorbs the air. The plants filter the air. The plants filter the water, and all of these impact our health. Trees shade our sidewalks and prevent, heat exposure. And so everything around us is very much impacting how we move about our daily lives.
And talk a little bit, I think one thing you talked about at one point is it's not just, our physical health, but also our mental health and our sense of ease. And so talk a little bit about that too.
Yeah, absolutely. There have been studies that show that actually working in a garden or working outside putting your hands in the soil, being hands-on actually reduces anxiety and stress. And I was just looking into this a little bit in prep for the podcast. And in 2022, during the height of the pandemic, the NIH did a study where they were looking at these health benefits that we've known about for a while, but how, and I want to quote, that gardening can be a public health strategy readily accessible to boost societal resilience to disturbances.
Oh my gosh.
Which is fascinating. And I think we all lived through COVID, and it was really tough on a lot of us and a lot of our families. But one sort of silver lining is that we all learned to appreciate and get outside more because we were forced to. And I think we all begin to see a little bit more the benefit and the public health benefit of being outdoors.
We'll have to post that study. So that's really interesting. So it was like the act of actually like gardening and being outside had measurable impact on people's health during that time.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
And social resilience.
Yeah.
In times of struggle. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So hopefully that gives a sense a little bit of what landscape architecture is, how you can start to think about it, contextualize it in your daily life. And then, how does it improve or, help our health or not, or help our neighborhoods or not. So hopefully that's like a little bit of a background. But I think to give this, even more a sense of examples would be, I'd love to hear about some projects you've worked on. I think, they do range in scale, your work at SCAPE, but then your work when you ran your own practice for a while. So if you could tell us a little bit about some of those projects.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing that excites me a lot about landscape architecture. As I mentioned, it ranges across scales, so you can never get bored. And then I also want to add one aspect of landscape architecture and landscape architects is that we're systems thinkers and we're generalists and kind of synthesizers. So we understand a little bit of a lot of different disciplines. We understand a little hydrology, a little engineering, architecture, art, botany, and we're able to kind of bring those all together into a cohesive design. One project I worked on at this point years ago, but it was in Norfolk, Virginia, the Ohio Creek Watershed Resiliency Park. And it was a park we worked with. The Army Corps of Engineers was going to build a berm around a community to prevent coastal flooding.
And explain what a berm is.
A berm is a levee, or basically oftentimes they're a clay berm, a clay little hill that's going to prevent water from overflowing a river, flooding river into a community. And so what we thought was the problem was flooding from the shore, but by working with the community and hearing their stories hands-on, we actually discovered that the flooding was coming from within the stormwater system within the community. So it was flooding from within the community and not from the river. And so working through community engagement and working with the community, we were able to learn more about the health issues in the community. And we thought they were one thing as outsiders, but they were actually a different thing.
Were you able to change the plan? Did the Army Corps of Engineers change their thinking around doing a berm, or did they still do a berm?
Well, we were able to, there was going to be a berm no matter what. It's the Army Corps of Engineers. And so, but we were able to rethink where the berm was going to be. And instead we positioned the berm in the middle of the community and actually daylit a creek, which would otherwise have been behind the berm and kind of hidden, revealing that, and then also creating a public park around the berm to kind of bring kind of these two disparate neighborhoods together, get people outside, get the kids playing across the neighborhoods, and promoting sort of recreation and health.
Yeah, just adding to that, I think one of the key things I keep coming back to in doing this work on Places Medicine is the power of nature. And it's studies where, what Dr. Rachel Keith brought up with, the volatile organic compounds, the smells that come off of trees and how that can benefit our bodies. But it's also nature-based solutions in our environments. And some of that can be things like daylighting creeks that were covered over with pavement for a long amount of time. And so you're able to take, what was once concrete or a road, and suddenly, when it rained before, it was an impervious surface, so it would flood. But now with, when you daylight this, suddenly there's dirt again, and there's actual leaves and something green that can absorb the water. So it creates this much, more robust system and way to deal with, natural occurrences. So
Yeah.
I just keep coming back to like, okay, let's keep using the power of nature and understanding it more.
Yeah,
So,
it's performative from an environmental standpoint, but it's also providing new program for people
Yeah.
in the neighborhood. And it's all about exposing hidden systems. And this is a larger conversation about increasing awareness of the world around us to the people who inhabit it and walk by it every day. You might not realize you're walking over this culvert in this road. It's not part of your mind on a daily basis. And then this project, a landscape architect and engineers, a whole host of folks come in and hopefully daylight that stream, and you have a whole new sense of your region, your neighborhood, and the how this area is connected to a greater system.
Yeah, it's just like it's a wonderful. Sounds like a wonderful project.
Yeah.
But yeah, tell us more about some other ones you worked on.
So that's a not a typical, but a more common project that we do at SCAPE. These nature-based solutions, resilient projects, large-scale community engagement. Many years. Some of these projects take 2 to 10 years. Previous to working at SCAPE, I was at a specialized design build firm based out of Sacramento called Miraday, and our focus was more on the residential scale landscapes. And that was a big jump going from, because previously I'd actually been at SCAPE before working on these large scale projects, going down to these smaller scale private clients. But what I found the most valuable about them was not thinking about them as individual sites and properties, but thinking about all these different sites together as sort of a patchwork, making up a larger matrix of a larger system. And together, all these different yards would have a much greater impact. And that's a theme I like to focus on a lot in my work, is the power of the individual. And together, these individuals make a really strong collective impact.
Yeah, well, that gets to a book that I brought. It's called Nature's Best Hope, this book by Doug Tallamy. And then I also have, there's another version of his book, Nature's Best Hope, but this one's for kids. But maybe we can touch on that a little bit, because you talk about the patchwork, and maybe you can explain a little bit of his thesis and the homegrown national park idea.
Right. I mean, Douglas Tallamy he's a genius, and he makes these concepts very accessible to people in their daily lives. You hear about climate change and these big concepts, but he brings these down to the scale of the individual, where it matters in your daily life, and that how that daily life patterns can make a big impact. So. Yeah. Constantly crossing scales. But his concept of homegrown national park really resonates with me. And it's the idea that you don't necessarily need to go to one of our national parks to see wild and be exposed to, the benefits of nature. You can actually have your own homegrown national park in your yard or in your community. And again, this idea of putting these different patches together to create a greater matrix, this kind of patchwork ecology, can make a huge difference in the biodiversity and the health of our nature.
Yeah. He talks about it in a really cool way, where it's all well and good to have these national parks in Yosemite and Yellowstone and all over, but for the sake of actual like flora and fauna, having more interconnected wild spaces for migration and for grazing and roaming is actually really important. So the patchwork, I think, that you talk about is really, really cool and interesting. Can you talk a little bit about, some of the projects you worked on in Sacramento, like your the roving van that you would sell plants from, and kind of just, you did go from this really big scale with SCAPE in New York, and then when you moved to Sacramento, you started your own practice. And it is working much more with individuals. And so how was that experience of engaging with people one-to-one around working with nature and kind of experiencing that? So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. And to back up a bit, I joined Miraday to work with my colleague, Billy Krimmel, who's an ecologist. So I was yearning to work more closely with a scientist kind of on a daily basis. Even though SCAPE has an excellent ecological practice, I wanted to really team up with a scientist. And so one of our goals was to make everything that Doug Tallamy is talking about with homegrown national parks and lawn conversions, which we can get into, more accessible. And not everyone can afford, a massive renovation of their lawn. And so for our clients who couldn't afford or didn't want to change their yard, we introduced this. It's not a concept; it's a physical Mirror Day mobile nursery, which is still operating today out of Sacramento. But the idea is, if you don't want to pay for a full lawn renovation, you can go and buy the plants and do it yourself. So we're trying to access like all modes of accessibility, and tapping into, maybe, for example, you don't even have a yard. Even if you you wanted to do that, you only have a fire escape. So you can buy the plants and plant the plants in a pot on your fire escape. And yes, it's a smaller impact, but again, Tallamy's Homegrown National Park concept, together, if we are all putting plants on our fire escape, particularly native plants, it's going to make an impact.
Yeah, so talk to me. You just brought up the word native plants, and that's something we wanted to really touch on was, we talk a lot of why should we, what is a native plant? Why should we care about native plants? I know there's a biodiversity element. Talk to me about why everyday people should care about biodiversity. So go into that a little bit.
So native plants are plants that are from a specific region. Region can be defined by many different scales. I live in California, so I'll talk about California native plants. There are plants that are from that area that have evolved to that landscape over millions of years. And they're important because they have evolved and co-evolved with insects and other flora and fauna of that area, and together they support each other, whether that's through pollination or nectar, which then leads to food production and agriculture and the health of our watersheds, and that really relates to biodiversity, which I'll get to in a second. But native plants are a hot topic. There's some native plant extremists who believe that we should only be planting native plants everywhere. That's fine for their opinion. I'm somewhere in the middle ground of it's important to plant a large percentage of your site as native plants because of this co-evolution fact. But even not more importantly, but sort of equal weight is the idea that native plants are from the place, they represent the place, and they're place-based. So when you are working with native plants, when you're surrounded by native plants, you kind of know where you are in this world. They really fit the environment. They give you a sense of place. And again, this is like all grounding and all related to public health. And so we design a lot in native plant communities because the plants that have co-evolved together also look really good together. And so there's a beauty and an aesthetic argument there as well for using native plants. Yeah, and you talked about when we were talking earlier, in California, it's a Mediterranean climate. So you could have plants that are from Europe that are Mediterranean that would survive well in California and certainly thrive. We know that with grapes. Yeah. But there is something about is this of the place, and is it going to feel like Northern California or Southern California? And I do think that is such an interesting and important part. And so I think when, if you're listening to this podcast and you're outdoors, or when you do go outside, look around, is this, the street tree of New York City, or do I feel of the place in the southeast of the US? And what is that intrinsic connection to nature? So I think it's a really good point of is this of the place? Yeah. And to your point of just start noticing the plants around you. Does it feel like it belongs here? Or are we talking about a palm tree, in some place that palm trees shouldn't be? Exactly. So. Exactly. And then go in a little bit on biodiversity and talk a little bit about why does that matter? How does that help shape, our ecosystems? And then maybe going a little further, and why should that matter for me? Why should I care about that? Yeah, it's a really great question and another hot topic in my world in particular. So biodiversity is kind of shortened. I want to define it first by its biological diversity, and it's really measured as the number of different species across species. So it can be diversity among genes within a species. It can be the number of species, or it can be a number of ecosystems in a region. And why it's important is that it's a key indicator of ecosystem health. So if there are greater number of species or diversity within the species, or more ecosystems within a region, it's providing the support, and they're working together and supporting each other. Some of them are co-evolved, some of them are learning to work together, and it's supporting our agriculture. It's supporting pollination, which supports the agriculture. It's providing us with the air we breathe and the food we eat. And I think right now biodiversity loss is the hot topic, and that's really closely intertwined with climate change, which is another hot topic, but it's more than that. It's really it's creating this like feedback loop that exacerbates environmental and human health impacts. And so actually the American Society of Landscape Architects, which is kind of like our governing board, just released a sort of primer on biodiversity, because as landscape architects, we're going to be trying to track biodiversity more in our projects, kind of think like befores and afters of the number of species. We do things called bioblitzes, which is like seeing how many species are on a site. And then after our landscape architecture design or intervention, how many species are being supported afterwards. And again, that's all related to human health and our public health. And by creating shade, by adding insects that are going to then pollinate the plants, that are going to then pollinate the grapes or the vines or the orchards nearby.
So it is this really holistic thing. And I think that's one of the key things that, one of the key themes with Places Medicine is really nature-based solutions. And what are these? Is it the nature-based, is it a plant-based insulation in your home, or mineral-based paints in your home? Or is it daylighting streams? Or is it looking at plant-based extracts that might help you sleep better than an Ambien pill, like looking at nature in this way. So I think it's those nature-based solutions, but then it's also like, how can we think really big and really big systems wide of what are all these interconnections? So it's all, we can have beautiful gardens, but one of the great things about having these beautiful gardens is that it then can also improve the biodiversity of a whole area, a whole region, which can improve our health with our food systems and water systems and things like that. So it's all interconnected. So I really think that's fantastic. And then just riffing on it for a second, in real estate, actually, biodiversity is becoming something that's becoming more important with some of the certifications and reporting that we do around sustainability. And so we are, there's always been a really important track around how much are we reducing carbon in our buildings and being more energy efficient and saving water. But there is now more of a focus on biodiversity and, again, the before and after with the community. And so one of the things that we do at the company I work at is we do have bees at some of our assets. And the tenants love it because there's honey from the bees, but then it also is great for if we have landscaping at that site, for example. So it's becoming something that's more and more of a focus of real estate too, which is exciting to see. But before we jump on to next topics, can you go into a little bit more about the coevolution of certain plants and insects? Like obviously the monarch butterfly, you can talk about that, but are there a couple other examples that would just be interesting for people to know?
Yeah, I mean, the monarch is the go-to example, partly because it's such an iconic butterfly. We all recognize it from our childhood. We recognize them when we see them now, although they're farther and fewer between. But so the monarch and the milkweed plant have co-evolved together. And so the monarch is on the decline for multiple reasons, pesticides and herbicides, but also because the milkweed is farther and fewer between as well. And so the monarch larva relies on the milkweed plant to host its larva. And without the milkweed plant, this one species, the monarch, can't survive. It's crazy. Yeah. And so that is the go-to example of co-evolution. There are a lot more examples. I have to give credit to my old colleague, Billy Krimmel, the ecologist, entomologist, because he did a whole study on tarweed and sticky plants. So sticky plants will actually, gosh, Billy, I hope I don't get this wrong, but the sticky plants will actually trap insects and make it, them look like they're dead. And so that will then attract predators, which will then protect the plant from other predators.
Oh, wow.
So it's like this whole convoluted, sinister but productive evolutionary trick to protect the plant by, trapping certain species that then scare off other species. So another just fascinating example. But these little narratives are really interesting, and they give sort of like a weight to these plants, which otherwise might be not noticed or just underappreciated.
No, it makes me think of like when you're walking around an art museum and you just see the paintings, but then when you get the explanation behind the painting, suddenly everything unlocks. And so thank you so much for coming on to share all of this, because, hopefully now when we walk around and see the street trees or see the bushes in our backyard, can start to think, okay, what is that relationship that's happening that's actually so fundamental and so important that we don't even notice? Yeah. And I'm sure there's countless examples of that.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is that when I was working at Merida and doing more residential jobs, it was very much hands-on with the plants. So we'd be bringing the plants onto the site from the truck, and you would literally see more insects, on the site as the plants were coming in. It was just fascinating to see.
It's really cool.
Being hands-on, you really get a taste of what's out there.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll get into the insect part in a second, but before just going back on the theme of looking around us, but soil. I just want to talk about that quickly, because I know there's some really interesting stuff there. People talking about how important the soil is and like for our health and everything around it. So talk a little bit about soil. Yeah,
soils are fascinating, and so soils they're a living system. It's just we don't think about them as much because it's all happening beneath our feet, and we can't.
And we just think it's dirt.
We just think it's dirt. We call it dirt.
Yeah.
But soils are this living, breathing ecosystem. Most fundamentally, they support the roots of our plants. They hold nutrients. They filter water. They store carbon. They're great carbon sequestration. And they're home to all this microbiology and fungi and all these different this biology that we're still learning about, that's so fundamental to how we eat our food and how we support our buildings and our plants and everything around us. And like I mentioned before, there's some studies that we'll have to quote some afterwards, but of actually working in the soil and touching the soil and being exposed to this different biology in the soil can actually build your own resilience.
Well, people talk about, touch grass, take your shoes off, stand in the ground, grounding. Like there's a lot of studies around the importance of like literally putting our body in dirt. But again, the whole point of this podcast is really like look around the world around you, and it's it's also underfoot, literally in the soil. So dirt. Yeah. So it's fascinating.
It's so interesting.
I want to switch gears a little bit, though obviously all related, and talk about lawns, which, many people listening might have a nice, beautiful lawn. And I want to just preface it a little bit by pulling from Doug's book for a second on lawns. They're this iconic thing, especially in America. Everyone, the white picket fence and the lawn. People may not know, but lawns started back in the 1800s, 1700s in France. I don't know if you know, I'm sure you know this. It was a way for French aristocrats to show that they had all this land that didn't need a purpose. It didn't need to be grazed. It didn't need to be farmed. They didn't need hunting. So they could just own land for the sake of owning land and put lawn on it. So it is like truly a status symbol. Like that is the creation of it. And just a few stats, and then you'll probably go more and more, but lawn watering in the U.S. accounts for 30% of all water used during the summer in the East and 60% in the West. And then another kind of sobering statistic is 40% of the chemicals used by the lawn care industry are banned in other countries because they are carcinogens. So pretty alarming. 75 studies have documented the connection between lawn pesticides and lymphoma, for example. So, lawns, let's dig into that and kind of understand the broad spectrum here.
Yeah. Well, I like to start similarly. Like lawns have historically been a symbol of the American dream, and it makes sense. You're going back to France, and that you can afford a lawn, and but we need to sort of shift our thinking. We need a paradigm shift here of because, like you said, they use a lot of water. They require pesticides and herbicides. They do nothing, almost nothing, to support the biodiversity we just discussed. And so we need to think about converting our lawns into habitat or native habitat, and that's not just,
or at least considering it,
or consider it. Yeah, I don't want to poo-poo totally on lawns. Lawns are also can be great if you use them. They're great passive, and play sports on them and all that. So I'm certainly not saying get rid of all of the lawns. I'm saying we could use far less lawns, and simply letting your lawn grow out will eventually turn into a meadow, which would eventually turn into a forest. And so it really, by not touching it, you could allow, if you have a very large lawn, there's options there. But one thing we did when I was in Sacramento at Mira Days, we did lawn conversions. So we would, California in particular, because I'm more familiar with that state, the state and different counties offered rebates for actually transitioning your lawn into...
Do they still offer rebates?
It's county dependent. Some have run out of money because they're so popular. Wow. But it's based on your square footage, and it's based on the density of plants you put in. But it's a way to encourage people to get rid of their lawns, this heavy water use, especially in California.
Was it because of water use that it spurted in California?
It's mostly water related, sort of coming off those many years of heavy drought. Yeah. But again, we need to shift our aesthetic to say it's okay to have a wilder front yard, one that's not just a monotone green grass, but that has shrubs or flowering plants at certain times of the year, even a large oak tree. And so I think we're making a lot of really great progress, actually, especially with Doug Tallamy's work and writing. But it's a really fascinating trend now.
Well, and talk a little bit about, because again, one of the things he cites in the book, and I think about, my parents have a gorgeous lawn, but if you were to grow it out, those initial phases, unless they worked with a landscape architect, would be pretty ugly.
Yeah.
And it would look like, what happened at this house, crabgrass. So how should people approach this and think about this? And you don't want it to look like you've lost your mind and you don't care about your yard anymore.
Totally. And that is where a designer helps. I like to promote or design for an unorganized wild. And I believe it's Joan Nassauer wrote, I want to make sure I quote her. I think it's Messy Ecosystems, Orderly Frames is the title of her article. Yeah, Messy Ecosystems, Orderly Frames by Joan Nassauer, where she talked about needing a strong structure to frame something that's messier. So you can have this messier, wilder, performative ecosystem, maybe in the middle, and then it's structured by a row of trees or a hedge of one type of shrub. And that gives your eye something that it understands, like a vernacular to look at and be okay with and calm down. And then, it's like a nice backdrop or a nice foreground for a wilder kind of meadow on one side or adjacent. So that concept of messy ecosystems, orderly frames, I think is something we could play with more of to help adjust our aesthetic and what we see and think of as beauty. As a landscape architect, I look at a messy meadow and I'm like, it's beautiful. There's dead seed heads and that folks might cut down. I'm like, they're beautiful. They add texture, they add color, they add layer. But it is a big switch from the lawn. So how do we help change people's conceptions of that?
Are there resources that you could point people to that would kind of give them a start if they wanted to consider rewilding?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of it is regional because it's everything. The plant communities are different. The microclimates are different. The amount of rain is different. So again, in California, and I can provide some for other areas as well. Well, first, to back up, I would recommend reaching out to your local native plant society. most states have them, oftentimes counties. Master gardeners have, strong cohorts as well. So they can provide really great recommendations. In California, there's these state and county rebate programs where you can actually, along with those rebates, hire a landscape designer who can come out, and you get like some money back for their fee, and you can have them come out and talk about your yard and how you might like situate your exact.
That's so wonderful.
Yeah, it's really great, and it's great because it's like tying all these different things together. So the California Native Plant Society got a USDA funded grant maybe 5 years ago, and it was a marketing campaign for boosting native plant production in nurseries. And along with that campaign, there was a whole sort of design initiative that we did at Miraday, where we actually designed little vignettes or little stories or little narratives with certain plant quantities. So the idea is like you could go to the website and say, this is the style I like. These are kind of the plants and the numbers I need to get based on the side of my yard. So there's a lot of resources like that.
That's great. And we will put some of these on the website, because I think for some people it's hard to even understand how many plants should I buy? What do I think about?
Yeah. And I also want to say, like, it's experimental. Even myself as a professional landscape architect, I'm experimenting every day. So I think you need to be comfortable with the unknown and the experimentation of it, and use that as a chance to like grow and learn and work. And again, it all relates back to your own health and being outside with these plants and being hands-on.
Yeah, and it's so fun. And
it's fun. It's a great workout too.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. So one thing with lawns that I think is important for us to touch on is pesticides, herbicides. Yeah. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I recommend, before inviting like a pesticide company out to your house to diagnose a problem, invite an entomologist, someone who's an expert with insects, first to your house, and have them do a lay of the land. Like, is this a pest problem at all? It might not be. It might be a soil problem, So I would start with the
And you can
science.
do that. You can just go on entomologist in my area. Google search?
Yeah, and entomologists love talking about insects.
I bet they do.
So at my own house in Sacramento, I had a pesticide company over because I thought that's what you did. You just, I saw a spider and I was like, oh, it's time for the pesticide company to come out for both the lawn and around the house, like sort of the garden beds, foundation plantings around the house. And then I was talking with my entomology friends, and they were like, these are harmless. These insects are beneficial. In fact, they eat mosquitoes. And so invite the entomologist out first, see what the problem is. Is it actually pests? And then if you do require, some sort of herbicide or pesticide, it can be very specific to that problem, because the danger, right, these are poison. It's poison. It's killing things. And that poison can affect you, your children, your dogs, your pets. And so you want to be very intentional when and if you use it.
And quickly explain to people the difference between a pesticide and an herbicide, and if there are important distinctions there.
Yeah, herbicides are plant specific. So there are invasive plants, which are plants that are not from this area. And so they come in, they really like the conditions, and they just take over, and they will oftentimes overrun other plants, native or not. And they can be a huge problem and can be really difficult to get rid of. And so in that case, oftentimes ecologists will go to herbicides to remove them, because it's just a battle that you cannot win. But when that happens, you have to recognize that it's like a nuclear bomb of herbicides goes off, and you kill everything, with the idea that killing everything, including the invasive plant, is going to give the good species a chance to come back stronger. So it's a really, there's big debates on herbicides and whether to use them or not. The safest thing to do is always hard labor of physically pulling out the plant and the roots, but that just doesn't always work. And pesticides are more oriented towards the pests. Other living things, pests, from rodents, to more often than not insects. And so again, you just want to be so specific about what is the problem, and attacking that specific problem, opposed to like a general pest control that's just going to like wipe out everything in your house or around your house.
Another thing I've heard in speaking to a couple other landscape architects is there are other ways to go about than using pesticides. Like you could also plant smaller amounts of certain plants, so you're not attracting all these pests that see a huge buffet of food. Instead, it's just a few things to snack on. Or you can put certain plant species together, which kind of keep away plants in some way. So talk a little bit about, like, I pretend I have a lawn, for example. I don't. And I'm thinking about using pesticides because there's deer ticks or there's whatever it is. Like, how should I think about it? Are there other ways?
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. And to get to that, you really have to observe your yard, observe what's happening, which can be hard. But if it's your own space and you're there on a daily basis, weekly basis, you're going to see things that you wouldn't as like kind of like a one-time visitor. And so if you start to notice these things, like, oh, this patch of plants is just like covered in too many aphids, then maybe it's time to remove those or cut them back for the year and give them a fresh start with fresh leaves and all of that. Vegetable patches are a different story, right? Because they're going to attract potentially larger rodents and all of that. But it boils down to being more aware of what's going on in your landscape, feeling more connected to it and seeing these trends, and then dealing with them on a sort of plant to plant or area to area basis in your landscape.
Yeah. So I think lawns are something, it sounds like there are amazing resources for people to refer to think about rewilding, or at least to consider rewilding part of their lawn in some way to support biodiversity in the area and feel like they're part of connected to this broader whole. So it's amazing. So I want to jump ahead actually and just talk about looking ahead, looking at the future of this, where you're at now. What's exciting? What do you see as next for this space? And what are you excited? Are there projects you're excited about working on?
Yeah, there are two things in particular I'm very excited about. I mean, I love landscape architecture in general. I think it's a very exciting field, and there's so many different aspects and sort of focuses or niches to go down. But the ones I'm focusing on right now is how can we be more local? And it goes back to this notion of creating a sense of place, of where you are in this world, this like place-based approach, because if you're more local, you're sourcing materials from closer by. So stone, geology that's from near where you are, opposed to sourcing stones from Asia or something. And there's a carbon impact there as well, which just sort of boosts the idea of this like place-based landscape architecture. Plants fall into that category as well of being more local. Native plants are more local than non-native plants. I think it also forces you to be more hands-on and getting to know the materials, but also your local suppliers more. And it brings this sort of human aspect into it, and you can support your local businesses and your local manufacturers and suppliers. So that's really exciting to me. Local, related to decarbonization, related to place-based, this place-based approach. The other thing I'm super excited about that we're working on now at SCAPE is data, like monitoring, tracking, collecting information through our projects, both before, during, and after, to then improve our design, and also to get more information on how what we're doing impacts climate, diversity, but even more importantly, our health, our human health. And so we just don't have the data yet. And it's something we're definitely trending towards, and something we need to focus more on.
And is that where, like, I know you've had some early conversations with some of our friends at University of Louisville, Dr. Rachel Keith, who was on last. Is that something you're starting to think about, of how can we start to quantify the natural benefits of the work we do, and think about how that improves our heart health or our, other comorbidities? Are you thinking about that as well?
Yeah, we are thinking about it, still conceptually, but the idea our work is part of these ecosystem services, which are going to be improving, hopefully, our human health. So, for example, we're working with UC Berkeley on a tree canopy plan, a landscape climate adaptation plan that's focusing on the tree canopy. And we're looking at all sorts of aspects of sort of urban heat island and, native versus non-native trees, and thinking about migration of trees due to climate change, all that. And where we need to keep moving forward on this study is with the health aspect of all this, how the trees are providing shade and then reducing, the effects of these hotter and hotter days, for example, which in turn reduces, the heat impact on us. Mm-hmm. So, we've got a lot of work to do still, but the trends are there, the initial studies are there, and we just need to take it farther.
Yeah, and I feel like starting to connect the dots on this, like, the tree canopy and, getting rid of the urban heat island effects. So the shade aspect of it is hugely important, but then starting to connect the dots then with the work that the University of Louisville is doing with the Green Heart Project, yes, where they studied, we talked about this in the last podcast, but they studied an area in Louisville that was 4 square miles, socioeconomically diverse, and they looked at one area where they had planted, I think it was about 8,000 trees and shrubs, greenery, they call it, not just trees. And then in one area, they didn't plant anything, and they did very rigorous testing, both environmental testing, but also testing on people that were participants in the study. And they did urine tests, blood tests, hair clippings, like even a bald guy, they had to clip his chest hair. Like, they went very deep on the tests, and they found that the people who lived in the area where there were trees planted and greenery and shrubs, they had a 10% reduction in cardiovascular disease over a course of a 10-year period. And so, like, these huge, amazing health benefits of living near greenery. And this was a 4-year longitudinal study, so it's pretty robust. And it was the first ever, my understanding, the first ever NIH study to see if trees had a medical benefit, which is just mind-boggling. So I hope that we can start to really connect the dots more and pull it into people's backyards.
Yes.
So.
Yes. Yeah, and as designers and clients, like, we have the ability to help make that change. We need to promote it in our work on a daily basis so that we can do more of these studies.
When you work with clients, have you seen it click with them when it's suddenly like they hadn't really thought much about their backyard spaces, and then suddenly it clicks that, oh, wow, it's connected to a broader whole? Do you see that happen live?
Yeah. And that's makes the work, my job, more meaningful too, is seeing the change in your clients or getting a call back, months or years later and saying how much they're enjoying their yard, or when they start to take ownership over it. When they, they took the design and now they're making it their own. I think that sort of collaborative design, and we do a lot of that at SCAPE as well through our community engagement, is when it's not this high level landscape architect coming down telling you what to do with your site or your neighborhood or your park, but you are co-designing with the community. That's going to make the park and the design richer, and is what's going to make the biggest impact on people's awareness and exposure, and it's going to make all of this, all the landscape and health benefits just more accessible and understandable.
I think it's that connection with the community, the storytelling. I often talk about, I'm on the board of the New York chapter of the Nature Conservancy, and we talk a lot, our two twin areas we focus on are biodiversity and then climate change. And I often say that it's hard for people to wrap their heads around climate. Like, even if you try to visualize it, you can't, because it can mean so many different things. But in pulling people into nature and helping them understand that relationship, so it could be through a daylighting project where you're telling people about the soil and the plants. Suddenly they're able to see, maybe they saw it before, but maybe even more so, that, oh, wow, I am part of this greater whole. And this is the planet that actually I do want to fight for, and I do want to care about, and I do want to be concerned that we have a changing climate that is going to impact this in some way. So I think it's just so important, the community engagement or the resident engagement who you're working with, to do that storytelling. So nature isn't just something that's over there, but it's something that is like all around me every day.
All around us. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So on that, let's end with a final question, but I'm really curious, what are your favorite places to go to?
Oh, it's so hard. It's so hard. I mean, I love to travel and experience new places, across the country and the world. But I have to say my favorite places are the places I frequent very often. So because you can see change over time, and the more times you walk down a certain path, you're going to notice different things, and that awareness.
Because you've become a native species in that place.
I've become a native.
Symbiotic with the native plant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So one of my favorite spaces in weird and wild Sacramento is along the American River, because it changes so drastically over the course of the year. So, in the winter, the river floods. It's a floodplain. And then once the water recedes away from the trail, it's a mess. It's a total mess, and it's wild and it's wonderful. And it's the disturbance generates new growth and change. It's just never the same. And then over the course of the summer, people define their own kind of trail system around this floodplain, and then it all happens again, where it floods, it erases, and the cycle starts again. So I think, moments like that that's a very dramatic example. I do have examples that are more urban based as well, but I think that.
Yeah, what's your favorite city example? Like you're in Lower Manhattan right now.
Oh yeah,
and you used to live here. Do you
I
have
used to live
favorite
here.
New York?
Yeah, I mean, I love the waterfront parks here. But just as much as I love the waterfront parks, I like the weird kind of liminal spaces, the vacant lots that you would just walk past, and there's like a wild random meadow growing between these buildings. And it's just like this little burst of nature amongst like a sort of concrete jungle that makes you kind of pause and realize that you're part of something much greater.
Yeah, I've recently gotten to know the New York Restoration Project, which runs tons of gardens in some of these liminal spaces.
Yeah.
And it's really exciting to see their work and how they engage with community and make sure that, whatever garden they're putting between the buildings or beside a building is actually what the community wants. And again, that engagement. So yeah. I think what's exciting to know with all of this is there are amazing people working on this stuff, whether it's Kate or New York Restoration Project or Nature Conservancy or whoever it may be, and really thinking about how we can have this better relationship with nature.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining. This was
course.
wonderful.
Thank you for
I really
having
appreciate
me.
it.
It's always fun to talk about landscape.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.